Welcome everyone. Welcome to the second EPALE webinar for this year. We are very happy to host representatives from MCAST, the National Literacy Agency and the University of Malta today for the second episode in our six-part webinar series. My name is Natasha Fabri. I am the EPALE NSS Malta project officer, so I will be representing the EPALE NSS Malta team today. I will be starting off with a very short video about the EPALE platform, and I will be showing you a little video about learning opportunities for EPALE.
Are you an adult learning teacher, researcher, organization, or policymaker? Do you want to learn from a vibrant community of adult learning professionals with over 140,000 members from 37 different countries working to make a difference in adult learning? EPALE is the right place for you. In this video, we will talk about learning opportunities on EPALE, the online course catalogue, massive open online courses, and open educational resources. One of the newer features on EPALE is the online course catalogue. The online course catalogue provides access to online training and certification opportunities for adult learning professionals who want to improve their level of expertise. They have been selected and are available on recognized online platforms from reputable institutions. Choosing the right course is easy. First, click on the Learn tab and select the online course catalogue. Choose the theme you're interested in, the language the course is delivered in, the particular organization offering the course, and the course duration. You will then have access to the course information and how to enroll. Another way to access learning opportunities is through the massive open online courses section, also called MOOCs. MOOCs provide free and flexible access to comprehensive knowledge on specific adult learning topics, with added support from the learners community and the opportunity of exchanging opinions and experiences. You can simply search for what is currently available as new posts are uploaded. Finally, open educational resources, also called OERs, are educational materials which are readily available to be used in an educational context. They are developed in various formats, allowing you to easily adapt and integrate them for your specific needs. All OERs uploaded on EPALE will appear on this page. Join the EPALE community now.
Okay, so now I'm not muted. Okay, fantastic. So I'm just going to show you a couple of slides just to present this webinar today. So today we are going to talk about the topic of literacy, exploring adult literacy in a contemporary context. And before we begin, I actually wanted to give you a little bit of background about what the EPALE NSS Malta team are actually doing this year, especially. 2023 is a very busy year for EPALE Malta. We have quite a few initiatives going at the same time. The EPALE thematic focuses for this year are engage, empower, and include, and that is of course all throughout the 37 countries, but in particular, EPALE Malta is quite busy right now with three specific initiatives. Of course, the EPALE webinar series, because this, of course, is part of that series, and then we have the contributor contests, which have already started. We have two contests running, one for the best blog from the 1st of March until the end of May, and then the second contest, which is for the best EPALE contributor in Malta from the 1st of March until the end of November. And we're also very busy preparing for the EPALE Awards. The EPALE Awards will be held on the 20th of October this year. So please watch this space and yes, keep up to date with what we're doing. And I will give you some information about how to keep up to date with our initiatives. So I have the pleasure of having one of our EPALE ambassadors, the longest running ambassador actually for EPALE Malta, Mr. Ramon Manjon. We're very happy to have him on this webinar, and he will be my co-host really. After my introduction, he will be taking over and he will be leading a wonderful discussion about adult literacy with our speakers for today. We have the pleasure of having Dr. Lara Ann Vella, who is the coordinator of the Language Policy and Education Unit at the National Literacy Agency, Professor Peter Mayo, who is joining us from the University of Malta, and Dr. Mario Cardona, who is from MCAST as well. Just a brief note about the agenda for today. So after I finish my bit, Ramon will be introducing the topic for today, and then he will be leading an open discussion about various topics that have to do with adult literacy, as you can see from the agenda here. As attendees, I repeat for those of you who have just joined us, you do not have a microphone or camera enabled, but we strongly encourage you to kindly put your questions on the chat so that we can put forward any questions or any clarifications you might need, so we can ask the speakers to get back to you during the session. So we have agreed that questions that come up on the chat will be put forward whenever they come up. So please do join us. We want this session to be interactive and productive for you as well. Of course, thank you again for joining us, and I'm going to stop my screen share. And Ramon, I leave you the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Natasha. I welcome everyone for this webinar. When Natasha informed me about the EPALE webinar series and to think about topics for webinars, obviously considers different options. I've been an EPALE ambassador since 2016, and obviously I've been exposed to many areas also through my background in adult education. I decided to focus on literacy and this particular topic because of its importance. In my daily role at MCAST as Director for Education and Training Programs, and also leading the Center for Learning and Employability, and also in my responsibility of working with key skills, and literacy being one of the key skills and key competencies in the framework for key competencies for lifelong learning, I feel that it's important. Recently, I also did research about the patient educational challenges experienced by healthcare professionals working with heart failure patients. And literacy was an important element because of the impact in terms of the ability of patients to understand and apply health information. Health literacy also is important because low health literacy can lead to poor health outcomes, for example. And so, in a nutshell, I decided, listen, this is an important topic, and I approached three important persons, Dr. Vella, Professor Mayo, and also Dr. Cardona, to sort of have this fruitful discussion about the importance of adult literacy, and in a contemporary context, because obviously the current contemporary world and the continuous dynamic changes happening in different facets of the contemporary world need people with good literacy, and literacy has an important part as well. So to start this webinar, I want to start the discussion with the panel members by trying to first have an understanding of what is literacy and why it is important, why literacy is important in our daily lives, particularly from an adult perspective. I actually would like to start with Dr. Vella, who obviously through her role in the National Literacy Agency, and I know that the agency does a lot of work because I've been exposed a lot to the work by the agency. So I would like to start with Dr. Vella, your understanding of literacy and why it is important, in your opinion, in the daily lives of people.
Okay, thank you, Ramon, and thank you to all the participants. Yes, literacy is such a taken for granted aspect in our lives. No, I mean, just being able to read and write. But from the perspective of the National Literacy Agency, we see literacy, first of all, as an understanding of various texts and modes of communication. So we do not limit it only to, being able to read and write, but also to an actual understanding of oral communication. So we extend it also to speech and also to being able to understand the language in relation then to different media. So different texts, different modes of communication in various media, okay, in everyday lives. And that is considered to be the key then to be able to access various, shall I call them capitals, or various, desired capital of that particular individual. So literacy per se gives you the key to be able then to function as an adult in, everyday life. Now, obviously, we tend to then, link it to employability, to having a set of various skills, but on a more basic definition, it is being able to live a life that can lead you then to your desired capital. Now, we focus a lot on the role of literacy from birth, because this is not a process that starts in school, but it starts basically as soon as a baby is born. And through these, socialization processes, babies, in fact, are put at an advantage when compared to other babies simply because of the presence of literacy in the home environment. And the fact the agency works a lot and tries to organize, sessions for parents and their children to help them to access this form of capital, this important key, which is literacy. So I'll leave it up to my, colleagues to continue with the discussion. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Vella. Yes, I can obviously switch now to Dr. Cardona. In your opinion, why literacy is important, particularly within an adult context, and we can also include an adult education context?
Well, I think literacy is, I mean, nowadays, normally in official discourse, we normally associate it with employability, as Dr. Vella has just said, but obviously it goes much beyond those confines. And I think if we speak perhaps of active citizenship, it's already much wider than that. And I think that we should look at literacy not as a standalone, but as part of the entitlement of what a functioning citizen in a lively democracy should be able to do. I think literacy gives access to the individual to engage with the community, with wider society. It gives the individual the possibility to grow as an individual, as a person, as a human being. It enables the individual to engage with situations that would enable the individual to become a better person in the end. And in my way of seeing it, it's also enabling the person to develop an ability to, as Freire said, not only engage with the written word, but to engage with the world around him or her or around them. Sorry, not very good at politically correct discourse, but no offense to anyone. I think literacy has a very important function to enable the person not only to engage with the world, but to be able to change it, to feel empowered enough, to feel able to bring about those changes in the community and in society at large that the individual would like to see in line with the vision for a better world. I think for a start, it's already too much, perhaps, but
Thank you.
we'll have time to discuss.
Before passing to Professor Mayo, I would like to quote one of the healthcare providers from the research I did, because I think it's relevant to the question of importance. When I was discussing key challenges with these healthcare providers, in fact, a direct quote that I have is, "Literacy presents a challenge for such healthcare providers," and the quote is, "As I explained, it is impossible if someone lives alone and does not know how to read and write. It is a big problem, firstly due to medicines. The patient would not know which is which, and there would be a whole problem. So this is a big challenge for us," quoting one of the healthcare providers. So there is relevance both for employability, as we were saying, but also in our daily lives for practical aspects such as finance, health, etc. Professor Mayo, what would be your take on this discussion of importance of literacy?
Well, I mean, it's such a vast subject and a very complex concept, literacy. Now, I know there are people here who are specialized in the field, but from my own sociological readings around literacy, I remember Jonathan Kozol's famous book, Illiterate America. Kozol was one of the first people who worked with Paulo Freire when he was in exile and lived in Massachusetts. I mean, you have a huge complex. Now, the most basic conditions are these. The most basic types of literacy include, because it's not finite, you can't draw a line. There is what is called basic literacy, which intersects with others, because then you have to ask the question, yes, basic literacy, learning to read and write, but whose literacy? Just to give you an example, in 1947, post-war, it was declared by the local substratum of the colonial government that Malta had an illiteracy problem, a literacy issue. Now, the word problem is already problematic in itself. So, a literacy issue. We have 33% illiterates. And of course, my question would be, and nobody answered this, I wrote this in my small booklet, Adult Education in Malta, because I raised the issue with the person who was responsible to solve, not problem pose, but solve this issue. And that was the late Captain Paul Bugeja, who started a literacy campaign in Malta. And he did a lot of work, excellent work, very much conditioned by the Maltese context. So you cannot, so the first point to make is this. My question to him was, literacy in what language? And he got stuck on that. Now, all the evidence shows, through the excuse of migration, because that was a primary motivation factor, we didn't have an industry at the time. Employment was mostly at the dockyard, through the dockyard school for some. And of course, we need to export. And to need to export to British colonies of settlement, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, United States, historically was British, etc. And maybe even London itself, Britain itself, sorry, not just London, but most people used to hang around London. So you have a question there. They bring Captain Paul Bugeja, who was an expert in basic English. But we're talking about Malta. What about this? Now, all the resources were put into the English language. There was teach yourself books. Captain Paul Bugeja used to produce his own books in teaching basic English. And my question to him was, what about Maltese? Oh, teachers were so left to their own devices. So that was given lip service. It was brought in maybe for nationalistic political reasons, but the main focus was English. So key question, 33% illiterate. In what language? In whose language? Therefore, the question to be asked is, whose literacy? And this is a
Professor Mayo, if I can take a point here, maybe if I can switch to Dr. Vella, because I know that this is quite an interesting topic, which probably you also find in schools, but even in other work. What do you think of Professor Mayo's question regarding what language?
Whose literacy, not just what language, whose literacy? That's a global issue. Huh?
It's an interesting point. Well, whose language? Well, officially both now Maltese and English. Okay, so even if you go to schools, both Maltese and English are promoted to various degrees, and I'll leave it to that, to various degrees. Now, whose literacy is an interesting point, because very often what you'll find is that the literacy practices in certain families do not match the literacy practices expected in schools. And that is the role of the school then to socialize these children into, the expectations of the school. Okay, but it's an interesting point which we can discuss, I think, at a later stage in terms of critical literacy. Who makes the rules?
I was coming to that, but I know I refer to different levels. There is basic literacy, cultural literacy, there is thematic literacy, like being filmically illiterate. It's such a vague term. Technologically illiterate. And then there's critical literacy, which is my favorite, as you know.
In fact, we do have a question in the chat box, which maybe we can take a point here. So it's Leah, and Leah is asking us, hello from Brussels, can you tell us more about the relationship between literacy and digital literacy, as digital literacy becomes as important as reading and writing? Thank you. Thank you, Leah, for your question. I don't know if maybe any of the panel members, maybe Dr. Cardona, would like to share some thoughts about
this. The issue of digital literacy is becoming obviously much more important by the day. Just to give one very practical example, our banks in Malta are transferring services from face-to-face to ATM-based services, online banking, internet banking, and I think they are trying to justify it by saying that they are more efficient, they are more tailor-made to the needs of individual customers, they are available 24 hours a day, but then in the end, I'm pretty sure there's an issue of cost cutting in them as well, because we all know the difficulties older people encounter when these very important services become practically based on the ability to interact with machines, with systems, with software, and not only older people. Sometimes even I myself at work, I find myself having to, input information on platforms which are really difficult to access. And the question I always ask myself is, if while I'm always working on a laptop and a mobile, and I sometimes find myself in these difficulties. Imagine people who are not used to, using Androids and using ATMs and online banking systems. How disenfranchised they find themselves in these very important situations, and they are thrown back at having to ask other people to help them out, and becoming kind of vulnerable in certain areas. Just to give one very insignificant example, just this week I was speaking to a neighbor of mine, and he told me, listen, somebody called me, and I can't find the missed call on my mobile. Can you kindly please handed me his mobile? I just looked up the missed calls and told him, listen, it's this guy who has just called you. Now, this is really an insignificant thing, but, managing one's own finances, becoming vulnerable because of your age, depending on others, and cutting costs by reducing customer service on a face-to-face basis is rendering many more people vulnerable and kind of disenfranchised. So I think that we need to really consider the plight of these people, and I think it's a question of both investing more in IT literacy, but also in being more sensitive to the needs of different people, and not taking for granted yet that all are IT literate, that everything is easy to do, that everything is within reach of everyone. I think we need to be much more sensitive to different people.
If I may, add something here,
yes,
the language issue also plays a very important part. And this brings up issues of social class, it brings up ethnicity. It's going to be more now in a multi-ethnic society where it favors the English language. And people who are only, like literate in Maltese suffer. I don't think it's their fault, because we always put the blame on the individual. But maybe not enough work has been carried out in the Maltese language to make Maltese language part of this literacy, this kind of media literacy, and of course the critical literacy to read the world, as Mario said, not just the word. Paulo Freire wrote that because he was translated into English, so it connects. You need that also for everything, in terms also of media. We have to make a distinction between media as a technical process, or critical media literacy, which is very fundamental in this age of fake news and spin, etc. Post-truth, as if there was a truth, this all comes into it.
If I may take one of the questions in the chat, actually before passing to the question, I agree that there are people that are literate, they can read, write, etc. But due to the modern transition, and I even have family members, elderly, and during COVID it was quite pertinent. They know how to read, they know how to write, they are literate. Even within the wider sense, but then when it comes to actually communicating with others through the digital means, they were struggling. Many people that ended up alone, they couldn't communicate, and it was quite a problem. So we have a question by Robert Michael Perry, who was asking the panel, how far do you think that raising basic literacy levels can impact on raising political literacy in English and, more importantly, in Maltese? And before taking the question, we have a comment by Tanya Juice, who's telling us, yes, much awareness has been raised about all these illiteracy issues in this digital era. It would be interesting to know what is being done to address these issues from your end. Thank you, Tanya. In fact, one of the next points which I was going to put for discussion is about local challenges within the current world context, and also the role of adult education. Let's go back to the question by Robert. How far do you think that raising basic literacy levels can impact on raising political literacy in English and, more importantly, in Maltese? Interesting question, Robert. I don't know if there is anyone from the panel who would like to take on this question. Professor Mayo.
Yeah, well, I know Robert. We're working together on a PhD thesis. He's doing it, of course, and I know where he's coming from. How do people get sucked in or duped into voting to a party which goes against its own interests. And I'm sure he has his own native Britain, his own country, Britain, as an example. And I can see that. And of course, basic literacy is very important, but also basic critical literacy is important, because how the media constructs a sense and manufactures consent. For those who are interested here, I'm going to wax a bit academic. A classic case is Herman and Chomsky's book, Manufacturing Consent, based on the whole Gramscian notion of hegemony. We're gonna have a discussion about that, but you know, I'm assuming the viewership is quite mixed. So for those who are interested, how do you get influenced in such a way that you get, like most things, you get brainwashed into believing a partial truth, which is presented to you, presenting you the good life that you may aspire to have, but in actual fact, you look at what happens, you don't get. I mean, Margaret Thatcher and her team were great at that sort of thing. And I think this is what Robert has in mind. And the legatees of that, which even runs through the Labour Party in England. But that you can apply this to Malta, etc. Okay, there are contextual differences. So in other words, basic literacy is important. Critical literacy is extremely important. You may have highly educated people in a formal sense, but critically literate people. So you're fluent in languages. I mean, even the way we learn our language, take Malta. I learned English. We never discussed colonialism when we were learning English. We never discussed social stratification and the role which English language, the colonizers' language, played in the form of social stratification. And that's why I have confused concepts about colonialism. You know, it's not just English, it could be French, whatever. It doesn't mean that the French would have been any better. And I have somebody in mind right now when I say this. So, you know, I mean, basically, because this is what I call this a very reductionist discussion about colonialism. But it is a very important point that what are those forces which are influencing people's minds? Now, okay, I have a lot of respect for people. Some people don't need to be taught because they are not dummies. You know, people react, people play their game as well. There's agency amongst people. However, we know that parties present to you internationally a view of the good life, which is flawed because it is very, very contradictory. It is a partial truth.
Professor Mir, if I can actually, from my experience, because you mentioned critical media literacy, which is an important point, and then we have another question which I would like to pose. From my experience, also wearing another hat, I've been involved for the past 21 years in radio program production and the media. And also from discussions that I had, I still remember one of my mentors telling me, listen, all media forms, all stations, all newspapers, they all have their own agenda. So here I think it's important that the ability to then interpret and identify the good, the bad, etc. from the different messages from these different media outlets, which I think literacy here plays an important part. If I can pass to the next question, which I think is important and ties to my next point, where the question by, I think it was Tanya, no, it was Leah again. She told us, thanks for your reply. Do you think there's enough done for literacy at the EU level? Which policy gaps which would need to be filled to achieve better literacy levels? Interesting question, Leah, and in fact it ties to my next point, which deals with the local challenges as well. Lara, if I can ask, obviously from your expertise and from your background in the NLA, National Literacy Agency, what would be, in your opinion, the challenges that we are facing at a local level, but we can also tie in with Leah's question, and at the EU level as well in terms of literacy, and maybe are there any policy challenges that you can also see in this discussion?
I believe that currently one of the hot topics is multiliteracies and validating. So starting from, okay, we are all, you know, in favor of validating different languages and validating the fact that people come with different cultural capital, but from a policy level then, what to do with it? So on one level, it's true, you validate, but on a practical level then, it all boils down to literacy in English and in Maltese to be able to be a successful, you know, citizen in Malta. So it's basically acknowledging what the individual knows and then leading the individual then to learning new skills and new literacy skills. But obviously, I believe that one of the gaps right now is how to go about this. And what to do with it in terms of not stopping just at acknowledging the fact that individuals come with different, you know, backgrounds, with different cultural capitals, but then moving and empowering individuals to help them to acquire other skills. Okay, so that I believe, I don't know if my colleagues agree with me, but I think it's one of the most pressing, you know, elements, not just in Malta, but also on an EU level.
Thank you, Lara. Before passing to Dr. Cardone and Professor Mayo for their take, Pamela is asking, has the policy for adolescents been published, please? Pamela, are you referring to a particular, I know that there is the National Literacy Strategy, which at the moment it's under public consultation, and I believe it should be published soon, but I don't know if you're referring.
Published in the coming months as a final document.
Okay. I'm not sure if you're referring to that policy, Pamela. Dr. Cardone, I don't know if you wish to add on what Dr. Lara Anvela was mentioning, and also in terms of the policy challenges.
I think we need to be a little bit more adventurous, perhaps more creative on how to reach out to local communities to enable people to acquire literacy skills, even if we take literacy in its widest sense. And I think that here it's also a question of asking what are the roles of local councils within our society, because I think we have developed local councils as a form of local government. I think it was around 1994-95. But I think that the process of developing this potential resource has kind of stalled. I think we are afraid to devolve more powers to local councils, to make them more effective, to make them more relevant to the life of local communities. And I think giving them a stake in you know, enabling local communities to access literacy skills could be a huge contribution in this sense. I know that the Lifelong Learning Directorate works with local councils, but I think that we need to give you know, much more resources to local councils to address this issue, because there's huge potential to work as closely as possible to local communities. In this regard, I also think that we need to view literacy also in relation to the increasing multiculturalism of our society. I come from Ormi, as many of you know, and in the last census, it seems that Ormi is probably has experienced the greatest influx of foreigners both percentage-wise and also in real terms. And while some people view that as a huge challenge, which it is, I don't deny that. But I think we shortchange ourselves if we stop at the challenge and do not see the potential in such a situation. It's a basic tenet in educational discourse that you only grow when you move beyond your comfort zone and challenge your own boundaries. And I think multiculturalism is an excellent tool to go through this process, engaging with people who come from different countries, from different cultures, speaking different languages, having different worldviews. It's a potentially huge source of learning. And I don't think we have harnessed this potential yet. And we usually stop at, being afraid of the seemingly unsurmountable challenges. I don't think they are unsurmountable. I think it's a huge potential we're not tapping into, actually.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Cardone. I have a couple more questions that we can also go into, which in fact may lead to my next point, which was also the next point on the agenda, or else on the list of topics with regards to initiatives by local entities. So Pamela is asking, what is being done to address adolescent functional literacy? These adolescents are tomorrow's adults, and many of them leave mainstream education without basic literacy skills. We also have had another question by Josephine Falzon. Can the panel be so kind as to explain what is being done in Malta as regards to financial literacy, please? And we also have another point. Dr. Cardona has just mentioned banks and IT strategy. How can these two literacy types be befriended, so as to speak? So let's try to distinguish between the different points. Let's start with the first one, which is about what is being done to address the functional literacy aspect. What I can say, and also I think this will be an interesting point for Dr. Vella, but what I can say from my experience at the Center for Learning and Employability at MCAST, yes, we do find many that come from compulsory education without certain basic skills, and it is a challenge. And that is why, at least as MCAST, apart from the fact that all our courses have both key skills and vocational units, so students do receive further learning in that part. As Center for Learning and Employability, we also do provide further learning support for those facing difficulties in these areas. But for sure, I know that there are various initiatives being done by other entities, and this would be a good opportunity to tie in with the next point. So, Dr. Vella, what other initiatives, obviously I know that the NLA does a lot of initiatives, but maybe some key initiatives that the agency is doing to address maybe this question raised by Pamela here. And then I'll pass on to Professor Mayo.
In terms of initiatives, especially when targeting adults and their families, basically the agency works mainly with adults in relation to families, because obviously of the, the research and the sort of the knowledge that if you catch them young, hopefully you will not let the cycle repeat itself. So basically there are read aloud sessions held for families starting from birth as well, moving on to the late primary years, okay, where also adults are sort of, they participate in these sessions, but they're not just aimed, they're not just sessions just for, babies and toddlers to have fun, but also to teach and to expose, families to book-rich environments, and these are held in Maltese and in English. And also we're trying to experiment with different languages as well, obviously always depending on human resources, okay, and the resources available. And these are free of charge and are held around Malta, okay, in different localities. And as well, there are also initiatives where parents attend with children who are struggling in literacy skills, you know, in schools. They attend after school sessions where the sort of the teachers, the educators work with parents and the children, and sort of they also try to teach the parents as to how they can support the children. So it's a joint effort always in relation to the adult helping the child, and also the child and helping the adult. So it's a two-way process. Okay, in terms of adolescents, well, to date, you know, sort of the strategy does, you know, identify the lacunae that that are, you know, present in our educational system, with the hope that, you know, they are targeted specifically, especially, you know, because the older they get, especially when children become disaffected then in schools, the more difficult it is to, you know, bring them back and to hone into their literacy skills.
Okay. Thank you for that interesting overview of these services and initiatives. Professor Mayo, there are many initiatives, but what is the role of adult education, if we can take an adult education perspective here, before also addressing the question of financialization?
Yes, of course. In this country, in Malta, there is. If you look at the history of adult education in Malta, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to draw a line, to parcel different things, because, as you know, adult learning is such an amorphous field. You can't say it starts here and ends there because it's so vast. However, my idea was, when I worked for the adult education unit, but of course I was preempted by people who had higher positions than I do, some of whom had an idea of what adult education is, others don't, but they pretend they do. It's power status, you know how it is. As I get preempted, I was a teacher on secondment, so I had no power in that respect. My idea was, first of all, as a famous political economist, sociologist, whatever, philosopher once wrote, who may not be popular amongst many people today, language is practical consciousness, which is as old as consciousness itself. That's in a famous work called the German ideology, the Die Deutsche Ideologie. Now, I start from there. And this is where Paulo Freire comes in, because he also based his own thinking on this. So no prizes for guessing who the great scholar was, or is, historic present. Basically, I try to go, if you want to create you want to create critical consciousness, help generate conditions for people's coming into critical consciousness, and I choose my words carefully here. You create conditions for people to come into consciousness. I think you have to come to something which is very close to people's popular consciousness, and that's the Maltese language. I'm a firm believer you move from the known to the unknown. If I want people to reflect on their own consciousness, what the Greeks used to call praxis, not to be confused with practice, let's use these terms correctly, nothing to do with the Maltese word, Italian word, prassi, that's what's habitual. No, this is not reflection upon what you're going through, what you're conscious of. I think you should start with a language closer to your reality. It doesn't mean you have to stop there, because in a country like Malta, and as in most colonial ex-colonies, a language of international currency, or often it's the colonizer's language, is also important. But you have to learn it not as a technical way, the way we learned English at schools, in a vacuum, but you have to learn it in context. And I raised the issue, what were the historical conditions which brought this about? You know, etc. And whose interest was it? And then what kind of stratification? And then, you know, then of course, you need to be very fluent in both languages. So in a country like Malta, I think a bicultural existence is extremely important. I would say connecting language with power, the more languages you know, the better. So it's not just a question of English and Maltese, especially in a small state like us. We also have another dimension, which is the small state dimension. And when you have a small state dimension, well, you need to reach out to a larger audience, a larger economy, a larger social milieu. You need a language of international currency, as our good friend Godfrey Baldacchino would say in his writings and his lectures. And I would say languages. The more languages you have, the greater your power. So
thank you.
One thing.
Thank you for that interesting insight, Professor Mayo. Now, to address the final point before passing on to closing remarks, there was a question about financial literacy and local initiatives of financial literacy. Now, this is an interesting concept, particularly in the, well, money was always important and finances were always important, but now also shifting to the digital world, etc. But financial literacy and the ability to take financial decisions, to understand what is going on, etc. And I think there is a good link here with literacy. Particularly because when you're going to purchase a financial product, when taking decisions, and to read and to critically analyze and critically reflect on the different services provided. That's a very interesting point. Now, with regards to initiatives, I know that local banks do have their own programs. I know that educational institutions includes financial literacy in their programs as well. At MCAST, we do have some points in our community social responsibility unit, which is a compulsory unit followed by all MCAST students. Obviously, I cannot tell you like in that unit there is that outcome, etc. But there are some points that are covered. But for sure, it is an important topic, and I think that would merit a whole webinar on its own. So I see that
Ramon,
Natasha has
if I
raised her
may,
hand. Yes.
sorry to interrupt you, but this is actually going to be the topic of our next EPALE NSS Malta webinar, which will happen at the end of April. So we're very happy to have had this question because it ties in with the next webinar that we're organizing. It will be a webinar that is organized with the help of Gemma, who is helping the directorate to organize financial literacy courses for our lifelong learning students here. So yes, we welcome you to join us for our next webinar as well. Thank you.
Okay. And in fact, gemma.gov.mt, the website provides very interesting materials about the subject, which can also help, and there are very interesting resources as well. So we're in the final 5 minutes of the webinar where we can have some closing remarks. So what I'm going to do is basically take some closing remarks from each panel member, and then I'll do a final closing myself. And then if there are now actually is the time. If you have any final comments that you want to put in the chat, now is the time. So I'll start with Dr. Vella. Your closing remarks about the topic and the different points, and any other recommendations also from your end.
Well, you know, my closing remark relates to the way literacy shapes the world. So literacy reflects the world and it also shapes the world. And in teaching our children, you know, and other individuals key literacy skills, we also have to point out this fact, okay, that knowing how to navigate through the world will help become more successful. and and it all starts from birth. Okay, so it's an important point to make. And literacy does change lives, it does empower, but let us also not be fooled into thinking that everyone has the possibility to do so. Okay, so even in these possibilities, unfortunately, there's inequality in the possibilities as well. So as from an educational perspective, education has to make up for this in terms of creating a more equitable, society for everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Vella. Dr. Mario Cardona, your final closing remarks and any other comments?
Some very short comments. First of all, I think we need to do some soul searching about the language teaching and learning processes that are going on at compulsory school level. Because I think we have been speaking for so many years about the number of teenagers who come out of compulsory education without the necessary literacy, language skills, and I think we are becoming a little bit complacent. We need to start doing something to ensure that people coming out of compulsory education do come out of that 11-year trajectory with the necessary, at least the basic language skills. I don't think it's acceptable that after 11 years of compulsory schooling, young people come out of the secondary school without the necessary, at least the necessary basic literacy skills. And to close off my comments, Professor Mayo mentioned the importance of knowing not just Maltese and English to at least be functioning in our society, but it would be ideal to know many more languages. And this reminds me of two very important educators who have influenced a lot my thinking on education. First is Manuel de Meck, who it was very interesting to read his arguments about why we need to learn more languages and not only Maltese and English. And his argument was the British are your colonizers. If you only know their language, you will be putting yourself at their mercy. So learn as many languages as you can, so that you can challenge their way of thinking, their way of dominating you, their way of colonizing you, their way of looking at a world that is construed in a way that you are always at the losing end. It's a very interesting argument on why we should learn many different languages, not just Maltese and English. Lorenzo Milani, the other educator, looked at it from a socialist standpoint, in the sense that knowing as many languages as you can will enable you to get in contact with as many workers around the world who can then communicate with each other, come together to bring about the necessary changes at the political level, basically. So closing the loop between education and politics, which I don't think they can be dissociated from each other. The situation where I don't know what word to use, but when in class we say we don't speak politics here, it's just language. It's the most ironic situation as an educator you find yourself into, and that brings me to an end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Cardona. Your final comments, Professor Mayo?
I'll try and be telegraphic. Meglio imparare molte lingue male che una sola lingua bene, ha detto Don Milani. Don Lorenzo Milani said this. Now, doesn't mean he was a stickler for proper Italian. Having said that, I think we must always talk about these concepts, not just literacy, any other concept, in the plural. So instead of literacy, I speak about literacies, because there are different constructions of the world which people have. And literacies connect with the whole view of a culture. There's a Welshman who's very famous here, Raymond Williams. It's a whole view of a culture, and we must respect that in our educational system. So you need to understand this, to appreciate this. I don't think we do this with this kind of unilateral kind of formal literacy, and also need the language of power. You need that language of power to be able to function. Now, you can learn many languages, it's better, but of course, in each context has its language of power. You learn it critically, not in just a technical sense. I'm thinking of English in Malta. You need to learn it critically, critical English, not simply the English the way I learned it at school and unfortunately also at university.
Okay, thank you, Professor Mayo. Just my final comment.
One final point.
Yes.
We do not underestimate or give less value to Odyssey, which is just as important. It's not just.
Thank you, Professor Mayo.
Okay.
My final point, obviously it's clear that literacy is important for various aspects. It helps in communication, education, empowering people, career development, personal development. Obviously educators, and I'm sure that many do a lot of work, but for sure we need to go beyond. I know that Ferreira was mentioned previously, the banking approach that Ferreira mentioned, whereby teachers are seen as depositing information into students. We need to have more inquisitive children and inquisitive adults, which also ties with the critical thinking and critical literacy aspect, which we mentioned before. And for sure, there are many challenges that are present, will continue to be present, but we can do more to mitigate these challenges. I obviously thank the participants that attended today's webinar. I thank Dr. Cardona, Dr. Vela, and Professor Mayo. Thank you for your very, very valid insights.
Thanks for the invitation.
I'm happy that this webinar was also recorded because very interesting points came out. I thank those that provided comments in the chat because you also provided some interesting thoughts for us. And thank everyone for participating. And lastly, the EPALE National Support Services Service from Malta for organizing this webinar. Natasha, I'm not sure if you want to have.
Yes, I do actually. Yes, I have a couple of things to say. Of course, I echo Ramon's thanks to our speakers, Dr. Vela, Dr. Cardona, Professor Mayo. This has been a really, really wonderful webinar. I'm so honored that you decided to join us. The recording of this session will be shared on the EPALE platform. If you are not a member of the EPALE platform, the EPALE community, I strongly suggest you check out the feedback form that I have shared with you all on the chat. You will find the feedback form, which also has information about the EPALE platform, also information about the initiatives that we're going to do and ways to contact us and ways to keep up to date with what we're doing this year. We will be back for our third webinar on the 28th of April. So please mark your calendars if you're interested in the financial literacy webinar. We will be joined by Petra Lul-Mercer from Gemma, who will be discussing with us the topic of financial literacy. It will be a very engaging session, very engaging as was today's webinar as well. So we're very happy to be evolving with different topics in every webinar. We welcome of course everyone here to join us for the next one as well. We will be disseminating the links and information about the next webinar, of course, through our normal channels. So please make sure to follow us on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and you will find this information on the web form that I have attached. Thank you, everybody. It was lovely to have you all. Have a lovely weekend, and we'll be back.
Just one final note of thanks, Natasha. Obviously, I thank the National Literacy Agency for their participation. Obviously, thank the University of Malta and MCAST as an institution for providing this opportunity. And personally, I look forward to further initiatives and also collaborations